There was only two singers in Mötley, me and Vince. And I've gotten, I'm still here almost 30 years later, 25 years later. And whether I like it or not, I'm the other singer from Mötley.
John Corabi's name is frequently interpreted as Mötley, the band's short-term solution in an infamous for its controversies and mayhem. He was the only one to step in without showing off, to hold rather than to break things apart, a soul already falling together in addition to being separated. The Mötley Crüe CD in 1994. He went above and above by pouring into it music derived from pain and suffering and a silent want to be noticed, even if alone and quiet, without the glitz he seemed to be. Unaffected by tabloid scandals, John Corabi is the type of artist who prefers to be quiet, who turns to music to cope with their suffering. Thus, as the universe was enchanted by pyrotechnics and the luxurious lifestyles of Corabi, a rock star was discarded and buried, living in the same narrative he previously assisted write, but time tells stories fairly. Sometimes what's forgotten is what's most noteworthy. As well as John Corabi, the voice that was abandoned now resurfaces as a silent reminder that rock isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a soul's whisper that won't give up. Early childhood. On April 26, 1959, John Corabi was born in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, into an Italian-American working-class family. He didn't play a guitar as a child or participating in church choirs as a child was formed by the shouting of cigarette smoke, matches, and the ongoing sensation that his family lived in a dangerous world. Was not affluent, but what caused John to years that were very difficult weren't just money. The quiet brokenness at the age of 10 for John. His father went without his parents when they split. Glancing back at his mother, who is now by herself with 3 children, had to balance 2 occupations in order to put food on the table and pay the rent. They occupied a tiny apartment in an unsavory area of the city where law enforcement, midnight cries and sirens were familiar noises. In order to facilitate the mother left the kids in the custody of the family, trusted their uncle. But such confidence would result in the highest. John experienced a horrible event one day at the age of 12. John arrived home early and unintentionally entered a room to observe his uncle mistreat his younger brother. He didn't yell or say anything. He simply froze when a sudden wound appeared. His impression as a child plagued him for years. In his autobiography, Horseshoes, and he admitted using hand grenades, saying, "I didn't not sure what to do because I felt ill. I feel guilty for not stopping it, and I kept it a secret for more than 20 years." Like many other families, the Corabi family that time period decided to bury the items they didn't want to confront. Nobody discussed, nobody looked into it, nobody fixed it, and John was a young student who had just started school. His initial chords on an old guitar began to realize that some discomfort could only be calmed by music. For him, music was not a source of happiness but rather survival. A cheap guitar from a pawn store, the Beatles tunes are playing on the radio. It was John's humble pie, Led Zeppelin. Entire world at the time. Each night as the outside his window, the streets sunk into darkness, he would plug in while sitting in a corner, his headphones, and attempt to join in on the song. Lonesome choruses he was not taught how to play, but no one taught him how to sing. Perhaps he didn't require that, as he was chanting in the most primitive tongue. There is suffering at a time when most children believed regarding future education. Corabi was just attempting to get by each day, but it was exactly that trauma and adversity that created an own genre of music identity that is stripped of and raw, pretending to say what he was unable to. He filled his voice with the world, and later when he performed with the Mötley Crüe or captured alongside the Dead Flowers, heard sounds other than rock in his voice they could hear from their early years that had never really. John Corabi's early career wasn't mended. Enter the world of professional music. By a significant contract or a fateful audition, he chose the difficult and drawn-out path. Hesitant and sluggish, step by step, armed with a hoarse voice and a battered guitar. formed by solitary evenings in the early 1980s. Working various jobs to make ends meet in Philadelphia, Corabi started performing in local bands that play at dingy pubs to small venues. Every performance was a struggle to capture the interest of the viewer, to maintain the band from dissolving, and to endure in an increasingly competitive music scene. His first significant success began when he founded the Angora Band in the mid-1980s. The ensemble immediately attracted interest in Corabi's distinct voice and songwriting ability, but Angora Change turned out to be merely a stepping stone, for the group disbanded shortly thereafter. However, Corabi didn't give up, but instead proceeded and formed the Scream This, a new band. Ultimately turned as the actual basis of his career in 1991, the Let It Scream's debut album was released. Produced by Hollywood Records, Scream by the renowned engineer Eddie Kramer, whoever Led Zeppelin had collaborated with, and the record by Jimi Hendrix was infused with hard rock classics with a hint of blues. Strong, unvarnished, and sentimental. Corabi's vocals were instantly striking and forceful, but rich in emotions, in stark contrast to the glam rock singers that were in charge at Outlaw I Don't Care as one of the time tracks. Additionally, Man in the Moon displayed his exceptional ability to write and performing, yet in spite of the caliber of the album didn't get much business achievement at that time. The rock business was grunge was quickly taking over, and bands with a traditional rock sound, such as the Scream, was abruptly judged to be out of date. Ironically, though, Let It Happen overnight. The Scream disappeared off the charts it was on its way to Tommy Lee's ears, and the Mötley Crüe's Nikki Sixx was hit. Corabi's deep, genuine voice, and in 1992, Vince Neil departed the group. His was the first name that sprung to mind. John Corabi received an invitation from the Mötley team open like a door. Surprisingly, after knocking for years, but he was well aware of the dangers of going through that door. Signified more than just grandeur. Stepping into a completely unfamiliar world full of risks and temptations, where he would need to do more than simply sing. Endure, and he replied, yes, without hesitancy, without delusions, only with one silent vow to himself that he would never alter who he really was, wherever he took advantage of the Mötley Crüe era. In 1992, Pain Erasure joined the Mötley Crüe. Was for John Corabi, who appeared to unfeasible chance from an he was an underground musician who was abruptly asked to take Vince Neil's place, an enduring symbol and one of America's largest bands. But behind that fame was a minefield of possibility. Arrived with bias, and the cheers where knives are always used in the back. From the first day, Corabi had to deal with tremendous pressure. Longtime Crüe supporters refuses to accept anyone but Vince Neil was characterized by the media as a standing in, as a throwaway or temporary substitute picker in an opulent home. But Corabi didn't recoil. Instead of attempting to be a clone of Vince Neil, entered the studio committed to redefining the group's. Moreover, his rich, warm blues-inspired vocals and sincere lyric style, he took a risk that few others dared to. Made the band Mötley Crüe grow up. In 1994, released the soul album, Mötley Crüe. Corabi provided vocals. It was a fan's shock. No more memorable anthems concerning drug use and sex parties. Instead, the lyrics were deeper and the tone was stronger. Fraught with internal conflict and sadness, and songs that challenged social norms, such as Misunderstood Till Death Do Us and Hooligan's Holiday. A band was seen entering a darker, more intense stage, as well as the emotional. The force for that change was Corabi. But while detractors applauded despite the album's audacity, the market turned it down. Sales for radio stations were poor. MTV showed little and refused to play it. Interest longtime admirers felt cut off. And new audience members weren't prepared to accept an alternative. Mötley Crüe, in spite of adding a depth of feeling to the Corabi, was soon, but the band was unaware of it, held responsible for their downfall. Tension increased. Cold meetings were avoided within the band. Eye contact, followed by an early day. Corabi entered the studio in 1996 to keep documenting what was going to become Swine Generation, only to find Vince Neil return without warning or justification. No farewell, Corabi was pushed in addition to. He was also removed from the band. His soul was filled with music. Into the time when Generation Swine was ultimately made available, and almost all of his tracks from 1997 co-written during a demanding year of labor were devoid of his name, in spite of making up around 80% of the he was solely given credit for the original material. Flush and Let Us Pray most are two tunes that of the plans had been changed. The rewritten lyrics and his voice nearly deleted devastated. Corabi entirely brought legal action against Mötley Crüe, and $4 million is being demanded by Elektra Records in damages. He said they had violated contract, copyright violations, and deliberate slander by downplaying his involvement. From 1994 until 1996, the case garnered media attention in the rock world for a little period of time, then swiftly disappeared. Without a trace and without a public trial, no apology or clear resolution ever provided. Even worse, when the biopic in 2019, the film debuted, recounting the Mötley Crüe's history with absurd John Corabi's humor and dramatic antics, was almost removed from the script. A man who was once a key part in changing the sound of the band, who contributed to writing a vital chapter that was omitted out without pity. Without words or scenes, no recognition, no honor. Corabi later declared in public that he was profoundly upset by the movie's purposeful erasure. During an interview, he declared, "I'm not requesting to be honored. Simply seek the truth. The reality is that I prevented that band from dissolving, and however they changed the plot as if I had never occurred concurrently." Corabi encountered a few people may experience this type of professional anguish. Recognize isolation after departing the Crüe. Doors that were formerly open to the public major projects were abruptly slammed. He was perceived as the one who didn't succeed. It was the man who filed a lawsuit against Mötley Crüe. Was unaware of his where longtime friends avoided each other. Audiences decreased as opportunities dried up. Additionally, the artist who had previously stood on he now found himself on stadium stages. New beginnings in bars. But John Corabi didn't crumble, he didn't post indignant rants, he didn't put out an album full of spite. Rather, he continued to write and perform. And managed to return to himself. Through every note, even though he was aware that he had turned into an outsider in the narrative that he once contributed to the healing process and subsequently projects following all of the chaos, John Corabi did not play. He did not vanish. He and the victim did not reside in resentment. What distinguishes Corabi beyond his voice has an almost unyielding fortitude. Despite being rejected, he continued to make even when he was no longer standing. Music he never took center stage in the spotlight. Disappeared from scene by the late Corabi started to revive his career. In the 1990s. From the beginning once more he collaborated with the former guitarist for Kiss. Bruce Kulick will create a union that is seen as a redeeming unions project, published 2-1 live album and several studio albums, building a devoted following with their unadulterated, sincere, high-energy rock. For the first time since the repercussions from the Mötley Crüe, Corabi had a genuine talent for writing and singing. On his own terms, without pressure or branding, simply listening to Union. Corabi's music continued to show up in a number of partnerships. He became a member of the Eric Singer Project ESP with the well-known Kiss drummer before taking over as a glam metal's interim lead vocalist. Legends Rat takes Stephen Peary's place for a short time. Despite the fact that his jobs were, Corabi frequently made a short-lived impression. Everywhere he went, his voice was clear. Authentic onstage persona and enthusiasm for perhaps the craft that never faded. Most significant period of his post-Crüe life, his time fronting the Dead, was his career. Daisies is a global rock phenomenon. group including participants from Guns and 2015's Roses with Snake Eye Nexus and more. Corabi wasn't only the leader till 2019. He co-wrote songs and performed as a vocalist. World and contributed to the creation of the celebrated albums such as Burn, Make Some Noise, and Revol, 2015, It's Down 2018. A fresh chapter was written in this age. Corabi was no longer a substitute. Turned into the dynamic, creative beating heart of a band with significant momentum. In addition to these team initiatives, he also sought a solo career unplugged. His 2012 album showed a stripped-down, blues-infused Corabi raw, personal, and passionate resonates with each acoustic sound. In recent years, he has released singles such as Comfortable, Bella, Gorgeous, and Your Own. The Worst Enemy demonstrates that even after 60, Corabi continues to hold both authority and sentiment in his songs. No more glorification, no other scandals. But that unexpected area apart from the cacophony. John Corabi's rebirth was not intended to return. But to retain. John Corabi's offstage personal life was never the kind of rocker who got caught up with excess or lost in his addiction. Personal life is similar to his music. Silently damaged but brimming with a persistent. There were no tabloids during the healing process. Corabi marriages without scandalous affairs. Decided to keep his personal affairs out of the spotlight as a means of defense himself after being deceived too much in his artistic career. He has a kid named Ian Corabi, who likewise went in the direction of music they don't have a loud or public, although it's solidly constructed on inspiration rather than anticipation. John once revealed that he always permitted his son to his own fashion sense, and the most crucial, he wanted to impart the value of honesty in life and in music. Corabi collapsed after departing Mötley Crüe. Enters a protracted depressive phase, isolated in the sector that was deserted by ex-coworkers, removed from all of the tracks he contributed to, or forced him to discover a new means of surviving instead of not only monetarily but also spiritually. And he acknowledged in the interview that, "I used to wake up every morning and inquire, does anyone still hold this belief?" Voice? Big didn't have the answer. Stadium lights or contracts, but from tiny events with only a few dozen attendees would join him in listening and crying. Acoustic ballads in those unadulterated raw instances that Corabi actually felt alive, without interruption or editing. Nobody made him change who he was. Additionally, meditates, reads, and writing for the sake of creating art, not for recovery. Composing Horseshoes in Hand, his autobiographical. For him, Grenades represented a voyage into the past. Wounds from childhood abuse, witnessing to the anguish of having music removed. History. The discussion took place with himself as well as a present for anybody who has ever been harmed but continues on nonetheless. Quest for notoriety, no controversy. Hunting games for glory. The life of John Corabi is an uncommon instance of an artist in the rock world who welcomes and lives authentically loneliness, but maintains a belief in music or individual honesty in a field that calls for its musicians to speak louder. John Corabi made a hotter, more outrageous choice. To live more quietly but honestly, and that very decision that places him among the rock's most resilient and lovely souls has ever been aware of modern life and its legacy. John Corabi, 65, has not made a decision. Retirement. He doesn't dwell on his former success. He hasn't become one of those either old-fashioned storytellers, such as numerous. He continues to tour as a former rock star. Records continue to sing as though they are the only how he is able to breathe, and oddly enough, following years of being rejected as an unsuccessful substitute, he's being acknowledged with a degree of he had never before been treated with such reverence. From the Stone community, Corabi got back together with Light Him Up with the Dead Daisies tour around Europe and the UK, signifying a strong comeback to key stages. The same titled album was released that year, received favorable reviews, and demonstrated that his voice was hauntingly heavy and gruff. Carried the same amount of weight. Decades ago, there was no trend or showmanship. Following simply rock as he always does thought it ought to be in accordance with that in Corabi, and the Dead Daisies in 2025 published the album Looking for Trouble, filled with a lot of blues soul, and it was an uncommon turn for a southern rock band that embraces powerful sounds, such sensitive ground, and Corabi, whose there are more scars on the voice than high notes, became the essence of that change. He's a storyteller, not a screamer. Halting there will also be a new solo record released. A project anticipated to be the sum of all the elements that make up a mature, contemplative Corabi, calm and influenced by someone's viewpoint who has endured the harsh cycles of fame. Current tunes such as Cozy Bella So, Gorgeous and Your Own Deadliest Enemy affirm this reality. Corabi doesn't, he writes to appeal to the market. Remain truthful with himself in private locations such as Whiskey A Go Go planned for August. Corabi continues to see his audience in 2025, although as a legendary figure requesting homage, but as a narrator, survivor, parent, and friend of an artist who has never feigned a he is humble. Which is what makes him more enduring than many rock musicians who formerly appeared on Rolling Stone's covers only to disappear following the cheers. The legacy of late John Corabi is unclear. It is discovered via record sales or prizes. In his perseverance, his capacity to endure tall following suffering, and in the style of music that exhales without the use of ostentatious studios or flawlessly auto-tuned voice that bears grief without resentment, a painful but unwavering life narrative. Hope is dwindling in a rock scene where hits are molded by its sole follower-based algorithms, and artists believes that John Corabi is still alive. Evidence that music is still genuine, and it can still originate from the heart rather than a marketing division, and maybe it is the enduring, silent presence that radiates. John Corabi was never the longest. The type of celebrity that Hollywood sought to never had the opportunity to stand on an award stage. Toppers of international charts never got admitted to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame notoriety, but he also never kept quiet, never feigned a voice when honesty was needed. He never compromised who he was while he sung. Even as the entire globe began to turn its return by a young person who saw terror erased in his own house to a vocalist from the history of Mötley Crüe to a peaceful Corabi is a storyteller on small stages. Didn't put up with all of the rebellion, but with an uncommon form of fortitude, the resolve to adhere to himself. His career might not be as successful by norms of the entertainment industry, yet it shines in a different manner, raw, energetic, and profoundly human. He doesn't require a name to describe him, with a guitar and a microphone, and a listener who's open to hearing sufficient, and perhaps in a time when everything is available for purchase, including views of fame. Confirmation from someone such as John Corabi becomes uncommon, not because he hasn't lost, but because he never acts as though he has won. After hearing this, how about you? What is your opinion of an artist who is so genuine that he has been forgotten? The ones who don't stand out could be that are the primary cause of rock's never really. Did you leave a comment below? Don't forget to subs.